We recently hit 10 million in ARR in less than 30 months.
What is your biggest hot take for the go-to-market landscape at the moment?
The most dangerous creatures on the market are the developer who is a successful business owner and a business owner, meaning a salesperson who actually learned GTM engineering.
If you had to repeat building the signal-based engine for HeyReach or any other company in your past, how would you do it differently?
Signal-based outreach these days took a little bit of a different turn because people were using that for personalization. In every modern day outreach, you basically have two things that you have to fulfill. First is relevance, second is time lapse.
What was your top 3 mistakes, let's say?
If you want to stand out, think about cross-platform. Find them on Twitter, but message them on LinkedIn. That's you putting them off guard on something that people are not doing.
Hi everyone, and welcome to My First Signal, the only show where we invite seasoned revenue leaders in order to discover the practical side of designing a signal-based go-to-market engine for the first time under 30 minutes. My name is Georgi, the CEO of Signal-Based. Now let's get practical.
Let's get to it. My name is Ilya. I am the CRO of HeyReach. Thank you, Georgi, for having me. To introduce myself, for the ones who don't know, HeyReach is a LinkedIn automation tool, one of the trending ones across Europe and the world these days. We recently hit 10 million in ARR in less than, 30 months, which was an amazing surprise, knowingly that we are coming from Eastern Europe. Judging by the name, you can easily discover that I'm no US citizen whatsoever. I'll be walking you through about the best practices in terms of what we've seen, and my position is a bit unique because I speak with agencies daily. I speak with outbound experts daily because that's part of my job, to know who is successful and who is not successful, and basically follow the best trends in terms of what's working in today's outbound and what's not.
Why don't we start, by the way, with something that is a favorite? What is your biggest hot take for the go-to-market landscape at the moment?
Okay, go-to-market as we know it, Clay invented that term because they needed something to say who is using Clay, how to be labeled as person. Varun thought of that. Brilliant idea, brilliant, obviously, initiative. Now, how that term evolved over time, it's basically that a person who knows Clay. Now, the question is, if you draw a parallel between who knows Clay and who knows Zapier 10 years ago, those can be essentially the same two people. So today's go-to-market landscape, when it comes to the headcount and the thought processes behind the people actually presenting themselves as GTM engineers, I can divide it into two segments. Basically, you have a person who knows how to connect things, but that person essentially waits on someone else to come and tell them, I need you to do X, Y, and Z. So I would not really label that person as a GTM engineer. I would just label that person as a GTM technician, if you will. On the second side, you have people who typically understand business relationships and markets, and they know how to connect things. So those are the guys who have the business logic behind of the decisions they're making inside of their play tables. And you can label those people being agency owners because those people are pretty much unhireable just because they know how to do things and know why they do it. On the GTM side of things, obviously the term signal-based approach or signal-based tracking was something that emerged over a year ago. It was wildly successful, and it still is. But now what I'm seeing is obviously something that people don't really want to obviously admit, is that if you follow the same signals, you will basically send the same messages. What that means is that, let me give you another parallel over here. 10 years ago, outbound tools were offering templates. So anyone who was using the tool, basically they were using the same template. Basically the recipients received the same message from a different perspective or a different center. Now, the templates, the signals actually became the templates. So if you have a company who is actively hiring for an SDR role, then you can expect probably 100 companies using Clay and be able to track that signal to actually send approximately the similar message. What we are going to cover, and obviously if you want to hear my feedback, is obviously about the signal-based itself, how it's used, when it's used, and what's the best practice in order to avoid being part of the group that actually sends the same emails or the same LinkedIn DMs. So yeah.
There's so much to unpack in here. Oh my God, that's amazing. So first thing first, kudos for the fact that you distinguish the go-to-market engineer role as a whole, right, in two different parts. Because I feel like nowadays, if you check the job opportunities out there, you see someone who is both technical plus someone who also needs to be very strategic, right? But truth to be told, these unicorns are very rarely found. So that was super interesting take, by the way. Maybe we can talk a little bit more later down the line about team formation and especially how you guys build it. Because I do know that you also have a few GTM engineers or technicians, I suppose. Just to dive in already into the actionable part, right? Which is how do you start leveraging the signals for the first time? Maybe in HeyReach, maybe in the past, what opened your eyes?
Okay, so let me walk you through when do we actually consider a person to be a proper GTM engineer. So essentially, since we were pushing as a tool, we were pushing for people to connect this tool with their other environments, with their clays, with their anytents, with their instantly, and so on and so forth. So naturally, this demand emerged where people will ask questions: how do I do things? How, yes, I can connect them, but why am I doing this? Like that, those types of questions. So that led me to believe, because we wanted to position ourselves as the thought leaders when it comes to a specific segments, meaning how do you do modern LinkedIn outbound, and that underfill that we have to answer those questions for people who don't have answer to those questions. So that's why I've hired, I didn't call them GTM engineers, because we basically build GTM engineers over here. We don't hire them. What that means is basically when a person actually who has a preference to work inside of Play, who actually knows how to connect things, API, it's a morning routine for them, stuff like that. I basically take that person and I put that person inside of my success department first. So they do not connect things, they do not run any campaigns, they just need to know as much as they can from our most successful customers by interactions with them. How are people using it, why are people using it, and how this can help. Now, the reason why I'm doing that is because once this person knows the best practices of the tool and the tool itself, and he already knows how to connect things, then basically that person, when he grabs a clay table, he already knows how to build out his first audience, because he knows who is potentially successful, who is potentially unsuccessful, and what to say to each of these few audiences. And that's pretty much the definition of how to become a successful GTM engineer. So bear with me here.
Just a question, actually.
Yeah.
Just a question, because I feel like, especially as we start to push more the gas on the pedal with signal-based, two types of GTM engineers. Those that come with marketing background, so which is pretty much growth marketing people, right? That are, certified list builders until this point and enablers. Or you have SDRs that are forced by the C-levels to evolve. So can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel like it's such a fundamental move and decision that you need to take. Because at the end of the day, you're taking out labor from your sales team, right? And we need to talk about designing efficient go-to-market system.
The most dangerous creatures on the market are pretty much a developer who is a successful business owner. That's number one. And a business owner, meaning a salesperson who actually learned how to do GTM engineering, right? Now, here's the thing. The growth marketers will essentially look at this whole thing as a campaign. Let's launch a campaign. But in order to sustain a business, you need strategy. And that strategy will hold multiple campaigns beneath it. The growth hackers are still growth hackers. They're not like, the reason that they know clay doesn't make them a GTM engineer. It still makes them a growth hacker who knows how to do clay, right? A proper GTM engineer usually emerges from a person who was into a success or a revenue role. And basically they know how this tool, meaning the signals, everything that is going on and at their disposal, meaning they can quantify it, they can personalize it, and they can enrich it. This is where these people make the most strategic, best decisions. Because I don't have to know clay to be a GTM engineer at this point. Why? So I'm going to tell you why, because I know what clay does. So my role at this company, and I'm coming from revenue, I'm coming from a person who actually did 3,000 demo calls within a span of 18 months. That's how much I've did, with about 45% close rate. So the way, I'm not spending time inside of a clay table, to be honest, right? What I'm spending is the thought process of why this is relevant. So what that means is basically, hey, I want to promote HubSpot. I want to promote LinkedIn and HubSpot, the connection itself. Cool. Gather the GTM engineers. And I basically say, okay, there are three major challenges that we will solve, right? So we will solve that if an SDR is leaving the company, the LinkedIn data is gone with them. And the revenue leader needs to have a proper tracking between what was discussed with potential leaders. So that's problem number one. Problem number two, there is no proper attribution. meaning an attribution. They're doing LinkedIn and email campaigns, but they don't know which one is actually leading to a deal conversion. So that's problem number 2. And a problem number 3 can really be, I don't see an overview between the LinkedIn activity, right? So with that being said, out of these 3 essentially challenges, you can think of 3 individual signals. So a signal for a challenge being high churn rate inside of their sales department can potentially be companies that actually are hiring new SDRs, company that actually lost SDRs, and company that are hiring a GTM engineer. So those are 3 signals per challenge. But majority of the people are making the same mistake that because they start with the signal and they think like this signal will essentially lead to something because everyone bases outreach on assumptions, but this assumption is so way off because you don't know whether the business that you're presenting or the business that you are representing your clients for, you don't know whether they're having like a solution for that challenge, meaning on that signal. So now, you see where I'm going with this? So it's basically, if you have a revenue leader, that person will start from what will generate money and who is the most relevant audience to generate money from, and what are the takeouts that actually point out that this business falls under this 1 or 3 buckets. And this is where I actually hire GTM technicians to actually find out those signals, create those audiences, and build out those personalized copies.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Can you chronologically walk me through the signal-based engine of HeyReach in the way that you just described it, but like go further down the line with what actually happened and how that initial thing evolved, and where were your mistakes? Because it's all normal for like people to make mistakes, and those mistakes turn into learnings.
When the signals were introduced, probably one of the best tools on the market, especially on the LinkedIn side of things, was Trigify. So what Trigify was essentially doing, they were monitoring LinkedIn activity based on keywords on a specific influencer or a specific company page, whatever it is. The best campaign that we essentially did, generated based on the signal-based tracking, generated positive reply on 4 emails sent, 1 to 4. And we scaled that up to 500 emails sent. So we essentially generated 125 people showing a positive intent to proceed and have a chat with us and join our webinars and so on and so forth. The strategy back then, it was pretty simple, but you cannot replicate the same results today. And I'm going to tell you why in a second. So the strategy was pretty simple. We basically mapped out influencers that were talking about outbound, LinkedIn outbound, modern day GTM engineering. That's all there is. Then we've pulled the audience from LinkedIn, meaning using Trigify, we've sent them into a clay table. Now, why did we do that? To find relevance, because every like, every commenter, you basically need to know their buying power. We know that they are interested in a topic. Let's see whether they have the buying power to make a decision. And once we've got that, since we've got them on LinkedIn, then we just automate the process and send them to HeyReach. And basically, the process was pretty simple. You have the most active and the most engaged audience on LinkedIn talking about the relevant subject. The only question is, do you have a solution to a potential problem that they have, which we did. So that's why that campaign kicked ass. Why it will not work today? Because today, it's oversaturated. Everyone is doing pretty much the same signals and everyone is pretty much sending the same messages. Now, for the audience, if you want to stand out these days on a GTM signal engineering, think about cross-platform. So a cross-platform, meaning find them on Twitter, but message them on LinkedIn. That's you putting them off guard on something that people are not doing. LinkedIn to LinkedIn, that's easy, that's already done. LinkedIn to email, that's already done. Let's say Twitter to LinkedIn, has not been done yet. I mean, in a small sample, but in the feeling of the recipient, it goes, hey, Georgi, I saw that you retweeted a post about XYZ on Twitter, that's why I'm messaging on LinkedIn. 99.9%, even if you're a GTM engineer, your first thought would be, this is not automated, because nobody's doing it.
It's a little bit creepy though. I discussed that with Frank too. Although it's powerful, but maybe here's where it gets interesting. Like, how can you bake that context towards their current situation? The best thing is the dating example that I keep on bringing up again and again. If your partner or whatever, someone that you like, says, hey, I love roses, would you go on the date and talk about the roses, or would you give the roses? You know what I mean?
You know, it makes a perfect sense, because here's the point. A trigger and a potential intel being found can obviously backfire in your potential outbound campaign. And this is probably where the people are making the most mistake, like the biggest mistake, because Yes, you have some not so public triggers, which are this company is hiring, and then basically sending your outbound copy. Hey, I saw that you are hiring for XYZ role. But then you have like personal things, right? And you can easily find them. Hey, I saw that your daughter actually won a championship in soccer, right? Now that can be messed up. So in the outbound, you basically know when you dissect an outbound message, then you know that you have a pretty much a breach, then you have a copy, and then you have a CTA or a signer, right? So majority of the people are actually using that to use inside of the breach, basically to mention something about it, right? Now, I am not a big fan of that. The reason being is that if you have something that you know for a certainty is causing problems, and then you have a solution to those problems, you don't have to even mention that, because that's obviously something that underfolds. So the signals essentially should be used for tracking relevance, but not for personalization. That's the main differentiating factor, right? So you don't have to go, I saw that you were hiring. You can go with something like, hey, hiring can be a tough job.
Yeah.
So now it changes, but it's still relevant because they're still hiring. And if you want to give a personal touch to something just to prove of, let's say you are offering outbound services and you want to offer your outbound services and the personalization, I would go with in a sign of PS. I saw that XYZ happened in your life. Kudos for that. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, awesome. It comes back to what I keep on bringing also to the people that I'm personally talk to around signal base. And that is that what you pretty much said until this point is that the signal is not the means, is not the end, it's means to an end, meaning you just take it as part of your approach and you use that context in order to know that at least they're going to pick up the phone on the other side, which is ultimately the way to go with, and that is like quite brilliant.
That's why signal-based outreach these days took a little bit of a different turn, right? Because people were using that for personalization, but to some extent for relevance, but not for personalization at the same time. And what I propose, and I've seen this working across the board, is when you use the signal only for the relevance. Basically, in every modern day outreach, you basically have two things that you have to fulfill. First is relevance, second is timeliness, right? It can be a relevant offer, the timing being off, or obviously the timing is right, but not being relevant, meaning you've messed up on decision maker to begin with. So with that being said, if you bundle up the triggers against the challenge that you are going after, now you have cleared out the relevance, right? Now what you have to discover, it's not to showcase how good you are at personalization, you just have to figure out whether this is timely. Because timeliness is something that nobody can say. Like when you have no signal that will point out that the timing is now. You'll know, like, maybe that decision maker, yes, it's hiring 5 SDRs, but at the same time, he's divorcing with his wife. Does he care about outbound too?
No.
Hell no.
Probably not.
Probably not. That's why I'm saying, like, use the signal to create a relevant audience, but don't use it in personalization, because that's assumed that this is a problem. And what you have to discover is hiring people, yes, it's hard these days. Would you be open for a solution that solves problem X, Y, and Z? That's all there is.
I love that. And we already covered a few mistakes. What was your biggest mistake, or top 3 mistakes, let's say?
Over-personalization without relevance generates responses, but will not generate business.
Is that the example with the kids that want
That's
to change?
the exact example. Kid and multiply this by 1,000, and then you will know basically. So our biggest mistake was that if you generate responses, if you generate acceptance on LinkedIn, open rate on email, or reply rates on LinkedIn and email, for instance, our LinkedIn campaigns were pacing with around 40% reply rate, because people were generally interested to know how did we learn about them so much. And we didn't, because it was a clay table and it was like a GTM technician who actually just built this out for us. So long story short, it's generated a lot of conversation, a lot of time spent, a lot of nurturing, but essentially we had a hard time to actually move the needle from I've reached you for a general interest about X, Y, and Z, and let's do business together. Because in every outreach, especially on the LinkedIn side of things, you have obviously you have 2 verticals. Either it's too soon or too late. Too soon, sending a calendar link inside of your connection request. Too late, hey Georgia, how is the weather in Amsterdam? How do you turn how is your weather in Amsterdam to, hey Georgia, get a link into?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So that's the biggest mistake that we've learned. So that's why I'm promoting everywhere. Hyper-relevance beats out hyper-personalization, which means if you have a hyper-relevant audience, you can have the most generic message in the world. As long as it's congruent to the problem, it will be your best campaign.
We're getting closer and closer to the end of this epic episode. Oh my God, there was so much already that we discussed. I'm sure, by the way, guys, if you happen to have some questions, make sure to comment under the podcast on YouTube or under the pieces that we will post out on LinkedIn, and then we can jump together with Ilya upon discussing further that topic. And who knows, we might actually showcase some cool stuff in the upcoming year. So stay tuned definitely for that one. Okay, just to wrap it up nicely, if you had to repeat building the signal-based engine for HeyReach or any other company you've asked, how would you do it differently?
Nice. Okay. So I would skip the tooling. I would skip the how do I approach people. I will skip the warm-up accounts, the LinkedIn DMs, the thinking about the copywriting. I would skip all of that. And I would focus for the 3 months to learn as much as I can for a specific decision maker role and for a specific market. Because obviously you have to know the trends on a specific sample of people upon which you're going to reach out with a proposed solution about an XYZ problem. If you fail at that stage, sure, you will get responses. You'll probably get even meetings, but when you meet that person, you know so little about them, then it doesn't even make sense for them to listen to you. Right? So what I would do better is, let's say I want to target recruiters. That's where I want to start. I would jump into 3 months to actually study the pain points, the challenges, the decision makers, the key decision makers, the champions within the recruitment space. And then I would jump into obviously giving the tooling, creating lead lists, sending specific messages and so on and so forth, and finding the right signals that point out that specific audience.
Question here, because I do know a lot of marketing executives, because my background is in marketing, right? Then I move a little bit more towards the holistic go-to-market approach. But let's call it revenue leaders so far. Always this case where, but Ilya, we don't have 3 months to spend. The CEO wants results today. How do you battle that?
Okay. It's a very simple question. How much time do you have to spend? Right? Because you have 2 ways to do results. Either it's you pay someone or you do it yourself. Or the third way would be us doing it together. If there is a commitment, you can do everything. Right? My fallback, I don't know if it's a fallback, but let's call it a fallback. I don't have the time now. Okay. I want the results now. I cannot wait. Okay. If I gave you my whole experience and you will have my uninterrupted intention and obviously not intention, but obviously commitment to work with you for 3 hours per week, and we can crack the case within a week, right? Would you be open to spend 3 hours with me? And if the answer to that question is no, they were not ready for the results. They have a messed up priorities and they're just wasting time. But if they say yes, you basically will give your shot. And if you have initial results, let's say 1 positive response happened within the second week, you have the deal closed for months. That's all.
One sub question towards that, and I feel like this comes a little bit more on the soft side of like your skill set as a leader, right? How to handle people. How do you get buy-in, for instance? Because I do get now a few, let's say that I get on a few calls around signal-based and people say, hey, they don't buy the whole Clay/signal-based playbook. How do I initially open their eyes towards the fact that we need to move something beyond spray and pray?
Foot in the door. A foot in the door concept is you offering something that is small at price and so little on time spent on your end that will prove the case, because what you're proving is essentially that you are the person who can do things. And that's what they're validating within the first 3 months, even though they've hired you for a full role, but what they're hiring for you is obviously, can I rely on this person to be the source for whatever money he actually asked me to spend? I will see a return on those money. That's the first 3 months. So if you want like a small win, let's say signal-based, right? You're selling signal-based. What's the dirtiest place that you can start off with, but it brings the most value? Their CRM. Go to their CRM. They have, pardon my French over here, a shit ton of junk data. Get that CRM, import that into Clay, clean it up, enrich it, come back to the customer. You don't have to do the full CRM. You can just do 1,000 people. And that pretty much in a Clay table, it's 30 minutes job. Like that's all there is. And then you basically go, listen, your CRM actually has all of these closed deals. And out of these 1,000 people, 200 no longer work in those companies. So you might want to update that. And second, I don't know, 20 people actually changed jobs and now they're in the same role, but on a different company, for instance. And I don't know, probably some of them are posting content about X, Y, and Z. Do you want me to further find the signals across your CRM, which is basically me proving a point that I know what I'm talking about? Or would you like just to skip it and me to blast numbers across the board? What would you like?
So no, super, super powerful. Also, one very underrated play is buyer or champion tracking. So in that case, if someone forgets about the fact that they bought your platform and they move to being an executive in another team, the probability for you to capitalize on that opportunity is quite significant, simply because of the fact that there was so much value that, let's say, that they derive from you.
Sure.
And
Don't
from
forget,
there,
don't forget your customers. That's pretty much it. Don't forget your customers. Things change, life change, people change jobs, people die, people are being born. Be part of that life cycle as long as you're on top of it and you have a nice system in place that tracks all of those things. You have the winning combination.
just to wrap up the episode, because I feel like we're on the 27-minute, and I want to keep on my promise. What is the most underrated advice that you can give right now for the go-to-market leaders that they can start implementing straight up into after this episode?
Okay. Spend as less possible to get data. Get a lot of data. Basically, get a whole pile of data, right? Find the challenges, map out the signals. Don't rush into every signal. Don't jump into every shining object. You have to have a specific problem to detect a specific signal. So don't spend money on the data, spend money on the enrichment. And don't waste time in order to create a hyper-personalized message. That thing doesn't work. Create a generic message on a hyper-relevant audience. That's all I have to say.
Exactly. And that kind of goes nicely with having evergreen plays around the right context. Super good stuff once again. Ilya, thank you very much for coming and absolutely blowing our shoes away with all of the plays. If you guys have more questions or want to have Ilya again on the show, do let me know. And I will see you in the next episode. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.